Today on a busy day on Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, while we wait for news of roster cuts to leak out today, a day before the official cutdown deadline, the Seahawks get both bad and good news on Uchenna Nwosu. And in the meantime, add some depth behind him with yet another trade from John Schneider, this time a sneaky, interesting outside linebacker to essentially replace Darrell Taylor, who was traded a couple of days ago. Plus, we have some big lists to react to. ESPN came out with their survey, their top 100 players in the NFL today. How many Seahawks are on it? What does the rest of the NFC West look like? And the results, we wait for this every year now. The annual QB tiers survey that Mike Sando puts together for The Athletic, that is out. Get ready to resume the Geno Smith debate. Seahawks Forever coming up next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Thanks for tuning in, you guys, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on audio. Or if you found me through the Blue Wire Podcast Network, welcome to the show for the first time. Be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell on YouTube for notification of future episodes. And if you listen on audio, Seahawks Forever is available on any audio platform. Be sure to subscribe there as well. And if you like what you hear, leave a rating or a review. Go back and check out if you haven't already. It lives on my channel. But the big roundtable that we did yesterday, a big live show with Bryce and Ryan from the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast, an epic 3-hour show. Keith Myers from the Seahawks Playbook podcast was on there. Josh Edwards from the 12 Talk podcast. Chris Clough even popped in at one point, former beat writer for the Seahawks and published author, a couple of Seahawks books, friend of the show. All those guys, friend of the show, friends of the show. You've seen them on here. We had some streaming issues with Chris, but lots of great discussion, debate about the final roster and how we think that should look and our thoughts on the preseason and the finale against the Cleveland Browns. Go over to those guys' page, give them a view and give them a subscription if you would, trying to help those guys get to 1,000 subscriptions. They definitely deserve it. So today we wait for roster cuts to leak out. Some teams have released partial lists. We've seen 10, 12 players cut from certain teams. Just a reminder, just to set this thing up, the official deadline for setting your 53-man roster is 1 o'clock Pacific time, Tuesday, tomorrow. The Seahawks have typically been one of the most tight-lipped teams in the league at releasing these names. And even when we get to 1 o'clock tomorrow, we may not get the full list. Sometimes it's a couple hours afterwards because they're going right up to the last second, trying to maneuver, make these decisions, decide who to claim off waivers from other teams and things like that. And B, that's just how they operate. It always has been, right? We see this with the practice squad too. Other teams come out and announce it much earlier than the Seahawks do. So tomorrow, as far as that goes, I will be prepared to react to the final roster if we get it in a timely manner, right around 1 o'clock. May go live with that just so I can track it and react to it live. And then even later today, if there's any big news, any more trades, any really surprising cuts, we'll probably react to that live. Just another reason to hit that bell on the YouTube channel so that you get notifications whenever something happens. But the plan today changed quite a bit because we have a ton of news outside of the roster cuts. First, we got news of a trade, and then the bigger news dropped. And so I'm going to do those in reverse order. That we've been waiting for news on Uchenna Nwosu. He was injured against the Browns on Saturday night. A penalized chop block from Wyatt Teller, who's been getting a lot of hate, understandably so, on Twitter. We've been waiting with bated breath, and over the last 48 hours, you get into that whole mindset of is no news good news? And as I woke up this morning, I thought, yeah, it probably is, because if he had, let's say, torn his ACL, we probably would have found out yesterday. Those things are usually confirmed with the on-field diagnosis, right? You always see when the doctor grabs the leg and kind of holds the knee in one hand and starts trying to move the lower leg. They can tell immediately the structure of that knee if that's been compromised by the ACL. So I wasn't that worried about that, even though there was kind of some wild, sort of reckless speculation last night from some people that it could be ACL. But then yesterday, the report from Dr. Chow, the pro football doc on Twitter, that he thought based on video evidence that it was a sprained MCL. So we could all breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. The question then would be IR or not IR. And then Ian Rappaport, about an hour ago, as I record this, the first to report the news that Nwosu does have a sprained MCL, not ACL, MCL, and that he may be a candidate to go on injured reserve. A few moments later, Adam Schefter followed up that report, confirmed it, but then said 2 to 6 weeks. Now, very, very different timelines there. And if you recall, and I always go back to, I think it was the Jim Mora year, when I remember sitting in the stands and watching this happen, but Matt Hasselbeck got hit low on a sack and turned out to be a sprained MCL. So it's just always stuck in my head ever since that injury. It's a 4 to 6 week injury, sometimes only 2. And I say bad news and good news. I'm not trying to be trite. I mean it in this way. Losing Uchenna Nwosu for any length of time is bad. We saw that last year. But it's good news in the sense that it appears to be best case scenario based on what they're reporting. If it's 2 to 6 weeks, then the team may not have to put him on injured reserve. Injured reserve, he has to miss a minimum of 4 games. Now, here is some more good news. The NFL tweaked the rule this year. In the past, up until now, if you placed a player on injured reserve before or at the official cutdown deadline, he had to miss the season. You had to keep a player on the 53 past the official cuts, then place him on injured reserve after the fact, usually the next day, in order to designate him to return. Always thought that was kind of silly. And they've corrected that this year to a point. You can now designate 2 players to return from IR and put them on IR at the cutdown. So the Seahawks could put Uchenna Nwosu on injured reserve tomorrow at 1:00, and he would only have to miss 4 games. He would be able to be designated to return as one of those 2 players. The other one we're waiting to hear on would be Artie Burns, although, and I hadn't seen these up until today because I was at the stadium, and so the pictures of him being carted off and the expression on his face and the despair that it appears he's dealing with there, I think there's something more serious going on with Artie Burns here, which is so strange because when you watch the injury happen, it just seems so slight. It looked like he stubbed his toe or, tweaked a hamstring. Now, Coach McDonald said foot. Just watching the video, that seems strange. Maybe it's an Achilles. Maybe I don't know. Burns seems to be more significant. The other guys, maybe Cam Young is another one who is a candidate to be placed on IR with designation to return at the cutdown. So those would be your 2 guys. He could be a key part of that defensive rotation if he gets hurt. And we really don't know what's going on there. Mike McDonald said 4 weeks ago he was 2 weeks away. Some of the others, Draymond Jones, Noah Fant, guys like that who have been out, Freddie Jerome Baker, who've missed quite a bit of time the last few weeks. McDonald sounds pretty optimistic about those guys coming back. Now with Nwosu, because he is so important, I don't think this is just a hunch, or maybe this is what I would do. I would, if I could, try not to put him on injury reserve officially tomorrow until they gather more information. Because based on Schefter's report, if it could be closer to 2 weeks, well, that's the opener. Or maybe you only have to miss the Broncos game. Or maybe you only have to miss the first 2, Broncos Patriots, against what may be potentially now two rookie starting quarterbacks. If you can live without Nwosu for 2 weeks, if you think that's what it's going to be instead of 4, it's worth taking up a roster spot for, in my opinion. Now, it may come down to some other things. It may come down to there's a young player at the bottom of the roster, some of those offensive linemen we've talked about, that you're worried about exposing them to waivers. You want to protect them. You need to do that now. It basically buys you an extra roster spot, and you have the confidence that you can get by for 4 or 5 weeks without Uchenna Nwosu. We saw great things again from Boye Mafe this preseason. He'll obviously be the one to step up into that spot. Derek Hall will step up. He had a tremendous preseason, one of the Seahawks' best players, I think, this entire preseason. Mike Morris showed some things again. And so I think, the wise move in some aspects would be to just put him on IR. But if they get any indication that it might be a quicker recovery, maybe they'll be a little bit more conservative. In the meantime, though, before that news broke, they went ahead and got another depth piece with another trade, the 4th trade for the Seahawks now in the last 2 weeks, acquiring Trevis Gipson from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, hey, Jacksonville, we hardly knew you, right? He just signed with the Jaguars in March as a free agent. They trade him for what has been reported as a 6th-round pick. Don't know if it's the Seahawks' native 6th-round pick or the one that they acquired just the other day from the Bears for Darrell Taylor. So essentially, they swap Darrell Taylor for Trevis Gipson. And in some ways, their profiles are similar. Gipson, 27 years old. Jacksonville would have been his 3rd team. Seattle, his 4th team. 6'4", 263 pounds. He was a first-team All-American at Tulsa in 2021. Or 2020, excuse me. No, I'm sorry. 2021 was the year he had 7 sacks with the Bears. I think it was 2019 he was drafted. Why don't I have that in my notes? Come on, Dan. I know it's early. 27 years old, though, 6'4", 263, 5th-round draft pick of the Bears out of Tulsa after being a first-team All-American. He did have his best season in 2021 with 7 sacks. He then was cut on final cuts after his 3rd season and went to the Tennessee Titans for a year and then signed with the Jaguars in March, as I said, traded for a 6th-round pick. This is what Jaguars head coach Doug Peterson said about him this morning. When you have good players and other teams have needs, you're obviously going to listen. Trevis has done an outstanding job for us, and I think it's a good situation for him. It's a good situation for the team he's going to, and the compensation for us, it's a win-win. It gives him an opportunity to play, and we wish him nothing but the best. Interestingly enough, too, when you read Gibson's bio, his favorite team growing up, Seattle Seahawks. And we're seeing that a lot. Who was the other draft pick in this year's class that said the same thing? Byron Murphy. And it's because of the LOB. That was such a magnetic group, personality-wise, and the way they played, that obviously when you think about how old these guys were, when that was happening 10 years ago, very influential time of their life. Gibson's interesting. He's long, 34-inch arms. He's very athletic. He has great bend. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got some clips up here. You can see the bend. You can see little dip move, little rip and dip. Compared to what they had in Darrell Taylor, if you're seeing this, if you're looking at this as basically a straight swap, and essentially it is when you look at the compensation. He is known as a player who is better against the run. You can see it in a couple of these clips here. Much better technique against the run, much better at setting the edge. More of a 4-3 type defensive end. And, we do know that Mike McDonald is going to play even numbered fronts quite a bit. So he's known as a guy that's a little bit better against the run. That was obviously a liability in Taylor's game and something that the new coaching staff just didn't have enough confidence in. But he also comes at about half the cost of the cap hit that Darrell Taylor would have been if you kept him. So you essentially swap these two players. They're about the same age. Gibson's a little younger and a little more well-rounded player. And even, based on those clips, I think he has a little bit more in the bag, a little bit more in his toolbox. Taylor would just kind of get by on frenetic, energetic rushes to the passer. He would sometimes overrun things. He would sometimes take himself out of plays. He was, in my opinion, more of an effort pass rusher than a guy who ever really refined a skill set or a toolbox of pass rush moves. So Seahawks lose Uchenna Nwosu today. We don't know for how long, but they pick up Trevis Gipson. And this would seem to, I would think, close the door on Jamie Sheriff, even if Nwosu goes on injured reserve. Because again, as much as he had a flashy preseason, we've seen this before from rookies, right? We saw it from Levi Bell last year. A lot of people wanted him to make the final 53. Incidentally, he was cut today, or it was announced that he's going to be released by the Indianapolis Colts. You go back even farther, we've seen flash in the pan, great rookie preseasons. Casey Williams, the most famous one. But even at this same position, Nick Reed out of Oregon as an undrafted rookie had a really dynamic, or I think he was a 7th round draft pick, had a really dynamic preseason one year with a bunch of sacks. But Mike McDonald's comments about Jamie Sheriff, to me, were pretty definitive after the game on Saturday. That, hey, pat the kid on the back, give him an orange slice, hope to get him to the practice squad, but he's not in our plans. Trevis Gipson is. And this seems like the kind of guy that Mike McDonald's had success with. Finding a guy, last year he did it with, even though these are higher profile names, Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney, finding guys who had kind of bounced around a little bit, been cast off from their previous teams, but he saw something in them and he knew he had a plan for them and a role for them and knew how to use them. Seems like that would be the case here with Gipson. So that all in and of itself would be enough for me to produce an episode today for you. But there was some really cool stuff to wake up to today as well. First of all, ESPN put out their top 100 list based on, a survey of players, and I think some executives and other people around the league. And it's always interesting when you see these things. You look for your own team, right? And this discussion that we've had all throughout the offseason about how many blue chip players does each team have? That, there are different mindsets about how many you need to have, but I think universally it's accepted that the teams that can contend for championships, you have to have a certain number of star players. And some people will even attach a number to it. You have to have 5, 6, 7, 8. Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks talk about this a lot in their Move the Sticks podcast. How many blue players, how many red players, how many yellow, green players. They have all these different categories. Well, when we did our episode, we came up with, I think, 4 or 5 blue chip Seahawks. Of course, we see things through action green colored glasses or college navy colored glasses because we watch the team all the time. So we're always going to have a little bit of a different opinion as much as we try to be unbiased. Than people in the national media looking at it from 360 degrees. This list was put together from all the staff writers at ESPN. And here's what they came up with for the Seahawks. Devin Witherspoon at 84. DK Metcalf just cracking the top 50 at 49. Here's a little bit about what they say about Devin Witherspoon. Last year, he was not ranked. Mike McDonald got the most out of his players as Baltimore's defensive coordinator. Now Seattle's coach. He may not have a more talented player on that side of the ball than Witherspoon, the 5th pick in 2023 who made the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Witherspoon proved to be instinctive in coverage, physical in run defense, and disruptive as a blitzer out of the slot, racking up 3 sacks. Can McDonald's scheme help him go from Pro Bowl to All-Pro? So Witherspoon cracks the list for the first time at 84. This is what they say about DK Metcalf coming in at 49. Metcalf's 1,114 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns last season were in line with what he produced over his first 4 years. The difference was his career best 16.9 yards per catch average, which ranked 5th highest in the NFL. Metcalf remains one of the league's most explosive receivers, and the opportunity for huge plays is one thing Seahawks players have cited as a hallmark of new coordinator Ryan Grubb's offense. Brady Henderson contributing to both of these rankings. So just 2 Seahawks. Go take a look at the list because, I'm not going to go through the whole 100, obviously. And if, ask yourself, do you think there should be more? But then you have to look at it within context. You have to see who the other 98 players are in order to really answer that. They then went on to list some guys that were maybe on the cusp, just missing, might be on the come, or maybe underrated, overrated. No Seahawks listed on that list either. As far as the rest of the NFC West goes, not too surprising. The 49ers had 8 on the top 100 list. I didn't count whether that was the highest, but you would think that if it's not, it's close to it. The Rams just 3, Stafford, Nakua, and Kupp, and 0 for the Arizona Cardinals, although they did mention Marvin Harrison as a guy, as a rookie who could jump up and be on this list next year. So just thought that was interesting. What do you guys think of that? Go give it a read. It's always fun to look at where guys rank. Lots of quarterbacks. I think you can make the argument that, some of these quarterbacks don't feel like top 100 players to us, a guy like Kirk Cousins, but the value of a quarterback is, just graded differently, right? And then incidentally, just in case you're wondering, Creed Humphrey comes in at 70 on this list. D. Eskridge did not make it. Sorry. I couldn't resist. Saturday night, after their thrilling preseason win over the Cleveland Browns, Seattle head coach Mike Macdonald talked about the playoffs as if it's just part of the plan and part of what they see moving forward. 17 games and then the playoffs, he said. Well, the folks at BetUS have the Seahawks at plus 175 to make the playoffs. How do you feel about that? If you want to sign up for your account today, you can do so at the link below. And BetUS will give you a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Not the only list that came out today. So we had Mike Sando on the show a couple of weeks ago from The Athletic. And I tried to get a little bit out of him about whether there were any surprises coming up on the annual quarterback tier list. Came out a little bit later this year than usual. And if you haven't checked this out yet, this is the 11th year, I believe, now that he's done this list. It's always interesting because he goes to the source. He goes to NFL coaches and executives. Let me read what the sort of the parameters of this are. 50 NFL coaches and executives were granted anonymity to share candid evaluations. The panel consisted of 7 general managers, 8 head coaches, 12 coordinators, 12 executives, 8 assistant coaches, and 3 involved in coaching and analytics. So a really cool sort of cross-section of brain power from around the NFL, and one that, I think is enough to give you a pretty clear picture of how these guys rank. This isn't a fan voting list. It's not a popularity contest. It's not voted on by players. These are guys that make a living evaluating and acquiring players. And he puts them in tiers. And so, first of all, just right off the top, let me ask you this before I say it, if you haven't read it yet. Where do you think Geno Smith belongs? We've had this debate for 2 years now, but in particular, it was real heavy this offseason. Some people, the range of outcomes for Geno Smith, I think is as wide as just about any quarterback in the league. Very polarizing. Some people don't think he belongs in the league, let alone as a starter. Others think that he's borderline elite and doesn't get enough credit. But where do guys that actually work in the NFL and make a living doing this feel like he is? He ends up tied for 20th on this list, tied with Derek Carr in tier 3. Now, let me tell you how Mike defines these tiers. Let's start at the top and work down so you can get some context and a feel for where they have him fitting. Tier 1. A tier 1 quarterback can carry his team each week. The team wins because of him. He expertly handles pure passing situations. He has no real holes in his game. They have only 3 quarterbacks in tier 1. And surprisingly, some of the guys that aren't in tier 1, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, CJ Stroud, Matthew Stafford, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy, Kirk Cousins, Jordan Love. I just named the guys in tier 2. We'll get to that in a second. Tier 1, Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. That's it. 3 guys in tier 1. Pretty exclusive. A tier 2 quarterback, of which I just named the list, can carry his team sometimes, but not as consistently. He can handle pure passing situations in doses and or possesses other dimensions that are special enough to elevate him above tier 3. He has a hole or two in his game. And then I gave you that list. So they have Geno in tier 3, tied for 20th. And the guys around him in this tier, grouped right around him, Derek Carr, he's tied with. Russell Wilson is right behind him at 22. And then the other guys in the tier, Tua, Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson. Dudes that are making a lot of money. So I think that's important to quantify right off the top. Like tier 3 isn't a diss. It's not a knock. These guys are making huge money. Tua and Lawrence just signed big, giant deals. Deshaun Watson, $250 million guaranteed, right? Kyler Murray signed his big deal that set the tone at the time a couple of years ago. Baker Mayfield's $40 million plus a year. These are quarterbacks who are valued and seen as franchise quarterbacks. Now, what's also interesting is Geno kind of held his ground this year, despite the fact that some people think his 2023 wasn't as good as his 2022. Although I would argue the last 7 games of last season might be the best we've seen from him and something I think we're going to see more of moving forward. But when you consider where he is in relation to where these other guys are compared to last year, Geno moved up 1 spot while Wilson, Murray, Carr, Watson, and Lawrence all moved down at least 3 spots. So the stock on the needle is pointing down on those guys in the eyes of the NFL know-it-alls, while Geno's moved up a little bit. And some guys leapfrogged him, right? Some of these guys in tier 2 are younger guys, like Stroud and Jordan Love. I think, before, if you're upset that he's 20 and you think that's low, and I brought this up a couple of weeks ago, because I'm a proponent of Geno. I think there's more in the tank. I think he has a better season in him. Definitely think he's one of the better starters in the league. But when in the past we would have this debate about anybody, you'd talk in terms of like, is he top 5, top 10? And sometimes the Geno detractors would come back at you with, I don't even think he's top 15. But look at this list. I think we're in an age right now where the talent at quarterback is about as good as it's ever been. We had this discussion recently in relation to what the draft might look like next year, especially with all those six quarterbacks being taken in the top 12 this year, that next year, as that class starts to solidify and some guys rise, already you're hearing that, we didn't think that class was that good, but some guys are worth keeping an eye on. We may end up with 4 or 5 first rounders. Well, are there 4 or 5 teams desperate for a quarterback right now? Like, the talent's pretty good. And so I would argue that, or you can make the argument that being 20th on this list now is equivalent to maybe being 10th or 11th or 12th a few years ago. I don't think Bryce Coots of the Hawks Own Rundown texted me and said, what do you think of the rating? And I said, I have mixed feelings. Like, I kind of think it's fair. I can see why that's where people put him. But I also think he's better than some of those other quarterbacks. I'd rather have them than some of those other quarterbacks. But I will say this, based on the very literal definitions that are laid out as to what these tiers are and what they mean and how they define these quarterbacks, can carry his team sometimes, but not as consistently. He can handle pure passing situations in doses and or possesses other dimensions that are special enough to elevate him above tier 3. He has a hole or two in his game. That's the definition for tier 2. That's how I view Geno Smith. He had to carry that team the last 7 games last year because they had nothing else going for them. They couldn't play defense. They couldn't run the football. And he did. And I just think his ability to get the ball downfield and layer throws and his arm talent, I think he fits that definition. And so maybe these GMs and head coaches around the league, that's just kind of where they see Geno being as far as talent goes in their eyes. but they're not following the definitions. I think Geno Smith belongs as a tier 2 quarterback, and maybe with a big year, he can end up there next year. Before we wrap it up, there's other news today in the league around the NFC West. In particular, Trent Williams has doubled down on his stance as he continues to hold out for a new contract with the 49ers. He has said, or it's being reported today anyway, that he will not play. He will not report and or play until he gets a new deal. There will be no caving in, giving in, ending his holdout, reporting just to play. Keep an eye on that. The other 49ers news that just doesn't seem to go away is the Brandon Ayuk situation. Well, certainly his ears and eyes perked up this morning when he saw that the Dallas Cowboys finally came to an agreement with CD Lamb. 4 years, $136 million. And what's interesting about this deal is a lot of these receiver contracts up until now have had kind of a dummy year or two tacked onto it. It's reported as a 4-year deal, but really in real money, it's a 3-year deal. This is a legitimate 4-year deal. He's going to get a lot of real cash out of this deal. CD Lamb, I think the second highest paid non-quarterback in history now with this deal. And certainly guys like Ayuk and Jamar Chase and DK Metcalf keeping a close eye on this. DK Metcalf goes out and has a big year under Ryan Grubb, which I think he's going to be a focal point. I think they're going to be more attacking downfield. I think DK has a potential to have that kind of season going into the last year of his deal next offseason. It's going to be one of the major storylines for the Seahawks and DK moving forward. I have a question before I leave you. I'm a huge fantasy football fan. I love playing it. I love talking about it. I love analyzing it. I'm almost as nerdy about that as I am about the real draft. And those of you who've watched the show know what I'm talking about when it comes to that. How many of you would be interested in a Seahawks Forever fantasy football league? And we could go as big as a 14-team league. I haven't played in anything more than a 12-teamer in a long time. I think it gets really, really tough after that. But if there's 14 of you, I would go that high. I'm not going to go any higher than that. I think it's just not as fun. Totally free. We would just use ESPN. We would have to settle on a time that everybody could make it and do a live draft, although you could, set up your queue and have auto draft. Let me know in the comments or reach out to me directly, DM me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, and let me know if you'd be interested in playing in a fantasy league. And it'd be something that we can check in on the show once a week and do a little recap, who's doing what, and sort of follow it along as we go through the season. And it would give me a chance to talk about some fantasy football, but also to share it with you, and would be kind of fun and interactive. So let me know how you guys would feel about that. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. If you want to support the show, all the different ways you can do that are down below. So check that out. Shout out to the guys at BetUS. Thanks to them again for sponsoring this episode. Thank you to Blue Wire Podcast Network for hosting the show. Thank you for viewing, and stay tuned because there may be more breaking news today and certainly tomorrow morning. And then heading into week 0, as it's now being called, no game until the 8th with the opener against the Broncos at home at Lumen Field. Just a few of the guests that I have lined up to come your way and be in your ears and eyes over the next couple of weeks. Jessamine McIntyre of KJR has agreed to come on. I think we're shooting for a week from today for that. Can't wait to get her thoughts on this team and the roster once it's finalized. Greg Bell is going to join me again sometime over the next week to get his thoughts and wrap up the preseason. And Griffin Sturgeon and I are going to get back together later this week and talk in more specifics about some of the players on this team and what he has seen from preseason. Griffin's always really open-minded about having his mind changed by certain players' performances, and so I can't wait. He's also just very brutally honest about guys based on film study. Can't wait to get his thoughts on especially some of the younger players on this Seahawks team. That's going to do it. I'm Dan. Forever and always go Hawks. Thank you so much for watching the program and supporting it. We'll see you next time.